The morning we left for Cascade Ridge, Sarah's smile seemed different. Lighter somehow, as if she'd shed a weight I didn't know she'd been carrying. She packed her gear with unusual enthusiasm. Water bladder, trail mix, first aid kit, each item dropping into her backpack with a soft thud. 3 days had passed since I'd confessed about Jessica from work. 3 days in which her anger had transformed, unexpectedly, into something approaching forgiveness. The trailhead parking lot held only 2 vehicles when we arrived. A blue pickup truck and a Forest Service SUV. Sarah checked her phone. No service, as expected, and tucked it away. We'd done this hike before, back when things were good. Back before I'd ruined everything with 5 minutes of weakness in a dimly lit office after hours. The first mile passed in tense silence. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, painting dappled shadows across the dirt path. Sarah walked ahead, her ponytail swinging like a pendulum, hypnotic. She kept checking her watch, which struck me as odd. She'd never been one to track time on our hikes before. "We should stop at the ridge overlook," she said, her voice carrying an undertone I couldn't quite place. "The view is especially beautiful this time of year." When we reached the overlook, the valley stretched out before us, a sea of green swaying in the breeze. That's when I heard the footsteps behind us, heavy boots on dirt and gravel. 3 men emerged from the trees, wearing dark clothes and baseball caps pulled low. The largest one cracked his knuckles. "Sarah," I said, realization dawning like a cold sunrise. "What did you do?" "You hurt me," she said simply. "Actions have consequences." The first punch caught me in the stomach, driving the air from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping, as the second blow clipped my jaw. Through watering eyes, I saw Sarah's satisfied expression begin to falter. "Hey!" A sharp voice cut through the air like a rifle shot. "What's going on up there?" A park ranger was climbing the trail toward us, hand moving to her radio. The 3 men froze. Sarah's face drained of color. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The largest man lunged for the ranger's radio. She stumbled backward. There was a brief struggle, a startled cry, and then silence. The ranger lay motionless at the base of a large boulder, her radio crushed beneath her. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Sarah whispered, her revenge fantasy crumbling into nightmare. "This wasn't—" "Shut up!" the largest man hissed, his previous professional demeanor evaporating. "Both of you, get up. You're coming with us." "Look," I tried, tasting blood in my mouth. "We won't say anything." "I said shut up!" He gestured to his companions. "Tie them up. We need to think." As they bound our hands with zip ties, Sarah caught my eye. The hatred there had been replaced by something else. Fear, yes, but also a desperate sort of apology. She'd wanted to hurt me, but not like this. Never like this. The fog was rolling in now, thick and white, as they marched us deeper into the woods. Behind us, the ranger's body lay growing cold, while ahead, the twisted trail disappeared into mist. Sarah's carefully planned revenge had gone terribly wrong, and now we were bound together not by marriage, but by something darker, the shared witness of a tragedy neither of us had intended. I thought of Jessica from work, of how small and meaningless that indiscretion seemed now. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, a harsh sound like laughter. We walked on into the fog, husband and wife, prisoners together, learning too late that some kinds of punishment spiral far beyond their intended targets. The men marched us for what felt like hours, taking unmarked paths I'd never seen before. The largest one, whom the others called Mac, seemed to be improvising a plan. "There's an old fire watch cabin up here," he muttered to his companions. "Nobody checks it this time of year." Sarah stumbled beside me, her hiking boots catching on exposed roots. The zip ties had turned her wrists raw. I wanted to hate her for orchestrating this nightmare. But every time I looked at her face, I saw the same terrified realization I felt. We were no longer playing at revenge. This was survival. "I'm sorry," she whispered when our captors were distracted with map reading. "I just wanted to scare you. I found them online. They were supposed to be professionals. Just rough you up a little, make you understand." "Quiet back there." Mac's voice carried a tremor now. The dead ranger had him spooked, and I was beginning to understand that scared men were far more dangerous than vengeful ones. The cabin appeared through the mist like something from a nightmare. A weathered structure listing slightly to one side, its windows dark and accusatory. As they hustled us inside, I noticed something Sarah probably hadn't. Mac's hands were shaking. His colleagues looked uncertain. These weren't hardened criminals. They were thugs for hire who'd stumbled into a homicide, and now they had to decide what to do with 2 witnesses. The inside of the cabin smelled of mold and abandoned things. They tied us to separate chairs, Sarah by the window, me near the pot-bellied stove. The third man, the quiet one who hadn't spoken yet, kept glancing anxiously at his phone. No signal, of course. The same isolation that made this place perfect for an assault now trapped us all together. Night was falling. Through the grimy window, I could see the fog thickening, turning the forest into a pale wall. The second man began pacing, his boots raising dust with each step. "We need to think this through," he said. "Nobody knows they're up here. We could—" "Don't!" Mac cut him off. "Don't say it, just let me think." I caught Sarah's eye across the room. After 15 years of marriage, I could read her expressions like a book. Right now, she was telling me she had a plan. Her fingers, hidden behind the chair back, were working at something. That's when I remembered she'd packed a multi-tool in her jacket's inner pocket. Our amateur captors hadn't searched us properly. But even if she freed herself, we still had 3 desperate men and miles of wilderness between us and safety. The ranger's body would be discovered soon. The fog was our only advantage. The same fog that had us all trapped up here could provide cover if we were brave enough or foolish enough to run into it. As darkness crept into the cabin's corners, I watched Sarah's subtle movements and thought about choices. Hers, that had brought us here. Mine, that had started it all. And the ones we'd have to make before this night was over, if we wanted to survive it. The quiet one finally snapped around midnight. "This is insane," he hissed at Mac. "We were supposed to make $2,000 each for a simple job. Now we're looking at murder charges." "Keep your voice down," Mac growled, but his authority was slipping. The second man had stopped pacing and sat slumped in the corner, staring at nothing. I felt a slight movement in the air. Sarah had freed one hand. She caught my eye and glanced meaningfully at the window. Beyond the glass, the fog had turned silver in the moonlight. I understood her plan. If we could make it into that fog, our captors would be as blind as we were. The quiet one was still arguing with Mac, his voice rising. "I'm not going down for this. That ranger—" The crash of breaking glass cut through the tension like a thunderbolt. Sarah had kicked backward, sending her chair through the window. She rolled outside in a shower of glass as Mac and his men shouted in confusion. In the chaos, I threw my weight sideways, toppling my own chair. The impact sent pain shooting through my shoulder, but I felt the wood splinter. "Get them!" Mac roared, but the fog was already swallowing us. Sarah's hand found mine in the whiteness. We ran, stumbling over unseen roots and rocks, the shouts behind us growing fainter. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own feet, but Sarah pulled me onward. She'd always been the better hiker between us. A gunshot cracked through the night. They were firing blindly into the fog. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter as we pressed ourselves against a tree trunk, trying to quiet our breathing. More shots followed, but they seemed to be coming from different directions now. Our captors had separated in the fog, disoriented. "The ridge," Sarah whispered. "If we can make it to the ridge, there's a ranger station 3 miles east." We crept forward, using the slope of the ground to guide us. Behind us, panicked voices called out to each other, growing more desperate. Then came another shot, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. "Oh God!" Mac's voice carried through the fog. "Tony, Tony!" They'd shot one of their own in the confusion. Sarah's hand trembled in mine, but she kept moving. The fog was our ally now, proving more dangerous to our pursuers than to us. We'd spent years hiking these trails together, in sun and rain and better times. Even blind, our feet knew the way. Dawn was breaking when we finally stumbled into the ranger station's parking lot. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing squad cars and search parties already assembling. They'd found the first ranger's body. As we gave our statements to the police, I watched Sarah. She looked smaller somehow, hollowed out. Her revenge plan had nearly gotten us killed, but it had also shown me something I'd forgotten. When everything went wrong, we still reached for each other in the darkness. They found Mac and the second man 3 days later, hopelessly lost in the backcountry. The quiet one's body was discovered at the bottom of a ravine, victim of a blind shot from his own colleague. Sarah and I spent the next year in therapy, separately at first, then together. Some nights I still wake up in the fog, running, but now when I reach out, Sarah's there. Both of us learning that forgiveness is a trail all its own, with dangers and mercies we never expected to find.